to order. It's just after 7. So welcome to our SEAC meeting this evening. Just to remember, the meeting is being recorded, and when you have something to say, which we always encourage, something to say, please just hit the microphone so that we can hear you loud and clear on the recording. Everybody has a copy of your agenda. So let's start. Opening prayer and land acknowledgement, that is me. So if you'll join me in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We come together in hope from different community groups, answering the same call to service, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in gratitude for the trust placed in us, for the opportunity to serve, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in respect, aware of our diversity, willing to work for the good, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in awe of the wonder and beauty of each of God's children, pieces of the same puzzle. We come together in God's name, and as we work together toward the same goal, each piece of the puzzle begins to fit neatly into place, creating a breathtaking picture of love, compassion, courage, and grace. Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And now our land acknowledgement.
As we know it today,
is rich in the history and modern traditions
of many First Nations and the Métis,
from the lands of the Anishinaabe
to the Attawandaron,
the Haudenosaunee,
and the Métis.
These lands surrounding the Great Lake
are steeped in Indigenous history.
As we gather today on these treaty lands,
our Catholic social teachings
call us in solidarity
with our Indigenous brothers and sisters
to honor and respect the 4 directions: lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors
that walked before us.
All these wonderful elements of creation exist,
gifted to us by our Creator God. We acknowledge and thank
the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation
for being stewards of this traditional territory.
Great, thank you so much. So item number 1.2 is the approval of the agenda. Everybody will have received a copy of the agenda in their meeting packages. Do we have any questions or comments with respect to the agenda? Any deletions, additions? No, all good, great. So if I could just ask for someone to move the approval of the agenda. Thank you, Trish. Moved by Trish, seconded by Rick. Okay, declarations of conflict of interest. Do we have any declarations of conflict of interest this evening? No? Okay, perfect. So moving on to item number 3, which is our presentations. I'll let you guys come up and come on up. So we have Bobby Crow joining us and Michael's, after all this time, Superintendent Skripik, is that good? That worked? Who is our Superintendent of Math, and Bobby, de-streaming coordinator. Thank you for being. I just promoted you. Yeah. So you have been promoted this evening. Thank you to you both for joining us. The presentation this evening. Don't worry about the director. I got you. Just okay. Perfect timing. We were just about to start, Maria. I know you want to miss this. So thank you so much for being here. We have a presentation on the streaming this evening. I know that is something that has been requested previously, so we're looking forward to having you present this evening. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Trustee Powell, and members of SEAC. Thank you for inviting us, Bobby and myself. I'm here because I actually have another portfolio too, and that's the de-streaming portfolio. And also, ironically, the de-streaming path kind of started with mathematics and then started getting some steam thanks to a lot of ministry initiatives. So I'm going to cede the floor to Bobby, who has been here longer than I have in terms of working in the de-streaming portfolio. And then you'll hear from me too. Some things you might have already heard because we did hear, how do we know things are working? And probably heard from me in a little bit about that.
Hi. Thank you for having me. So my name is Bobby Crow, and I'm the curriculum coordinator. I've been in the role for 2 years now, and prior to that, I was one of the consultants in the curriculum department. So I did pull some of this presentation from prior work around de-streaming with this group, and I'm just trying to figure out the lay of the land. How many people here were part of that or present for that presentation in 2021? Few people? Okay. Awesome. It just helps to give me a little bit of understanding. So what I want to do is essentially talk through make sure we have an understanding of what de-streaming is, as well as, really importantly, why were courses de-streamed? And then we're going to talk about some of the things that we've done in the board to be able to support the progress of de-streaming. And then I was lucky that I was given some of the questions coming from SEAC, and so we've addressed some of those as well. So if we want to talk about de-streaming as a program move, the why of this really aligns itself with our Catholic values first and foremost. When we think about this achieving, believing, belonging, becoming, what you're about to hear in the next couple of slides just aligns with this. De-streaming is in support of trying to ensure that we have the best understanding of who our students are, what they're capable of, and ensuring that they're able to achieve the best outcomes for them as people, right? As entire individuals. So that's part of kind of where we want to start. So Megs, if you can flip the slide for me, please. Okay. So many of these kind of key principles around equity and inclusion, are inclusive curriculum and assessment. Those types of categories are deeply rooted and connected into de-streaming and what was going on. So even prior to formal moves from the ministry to de-stream certain curriculums, we would have already been thinking about some of this work in how we as Catholic educators operate in our rooms. Now, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, when we talk about de-streaming, what we mean is that in our grade 9 classes, where we had academic and applied pathways, in grade 9, we've now removed, or the ministry has directed us to, and we have removed those streamed categories. So for example, for grade 9 math, there is no longer an applied and an academic course that you go and take. All grade 9 students take the same grade 9 math, right? The same is now true for English courses, FSL, although there's not a new curriculum for it. Geography now has a new curriculum for it, so it's de-streamed as well. So Megs, if you want to go to the next slide. The question becomes, well, why would we do that? Or why would the ministry look to do that? The long and short of it is that there are disproportionate numbers of various groups of students represented either over or underrepresented in various pathway categories. So what does that mean? We might see students from certain backgrounds end up in applied courses earlier on. When we see students in applied courses earlier on, we know that there are greater challenges for them for pursuing things like post-secondary education. So when we take a 14-year-old and they get placed into an applied class, that can have some really significant impacts for the rest of their lives. And so de-streaming is an effort to be able to say, let's push that a little bit further down the road. So Megs, if you can flip to the next slide, we'll see that Ontario is actually was the only Canadian province who was separating students into these academic and non-academic streams in grade 9, as early as grade 9. The other thing we can see in that second point is that the OECD, who is the Organization for Economic Community Development, it's economic. I should know that off the top of my head, but too many acronyms in education. When we look at streaming, there are benefits to students who would have been streamed into lower levels, while there's no deficit to students who were already, for example, in academic or headed into university pathways. There's no detriment to their programming. Okay, so we're going to come back to this at the end when we talk about like how do we measure the success of a de-streamed program. It really has to come down with understanding that de-streaming happened because the move to de-streaming happened because we knew that we had various groups of students that were either under or overrepresented in certain pathway categories that was not in line with our other demographic data. And this was a way to say, one of the steps that we could take to say, we need to ensure that we are seeing students for who they are and where they would like to go and how do we best get them there. Okay. So again, when I mention some of those groups, it's groups of students who are Indigenous, Black, and other racialized students, students who live in low-income households, students with special education needs. So in this particular case, students from some of those categories may have been placed into applied streams in grade 9, and now there is a detrimental impact to what pathways they may have access to as they pursue the rest of their high school education and post-secondary. So again, the big move here is trying to be able to better support these students. And a little bit of what we're going to talk about is that how do we do that? Next, you want to go to the next slide. So when we talk about the how, there's a few really big pieces, and those top two are the ones that I'm going to speak to kind of right now quickly. When we talk about the goals of de-streaming, the same as they were when the first de-streaming courses came in, when math came in as a de-stream course. One of the big things we need to do is make this cultural shifts in schools and amongst boards to identify and dismantle systemic discrimination and structural inequalities. That's something that happens with de-streamed curriculum topics. That's happening in all of the work that we are doing in curriculum, or trying to achieve it with all of the work that we are doing in curriculum. That's a huge bucket. This is a piece of it. One of the areas that we work at specifically is increasing educator capacity. When we look at this kind of contextually within where we're at, right, we're de-streaming classes. So we now have a wider, not spread, but a wider dispersion of where students are at in terms of their assets in that class and the curriculum, right, what they know. So teachers looking at a class, as class sizes are going up, you now have more students in your room, and you've got a broader spectrum of where those students are at. That is a challenge for teachers to be able to overcome. That's a big shift. The work that we do in curriculum is trying to support teachers in how do we do that? How do we achieve that? And ensure that we're supporting students wherever they are in that kind of position as they enter classrooms. What are their assets? And then how do we move them along? Next, you want to flip? So let's talk about some of the things that we have done. The first part of what we had to do with de-streaming supports was just trying to share the understanding of what we just did. Why? Right? When we look back, if you think about that slide that was just up there, talking about the cultural shift that's required and the increase in teacher capacity, we are all reluctant to do something if we don't understand, well, why is this happening? Right? To a teacher says there's now a greater or bigger dispersion of student ability and asset in my room. Why am I being asked to do this in this way? I've done this successfully in the past, teaching it this way. I now have students in my room that are a different makeup of students. Why do I have to do this way? Without teachers having a fulsome understanding of things like some of those structural inequalities that exist, why they exist, and that we have agency in resolving those, we weren't going to be able to make some of the moves with de-streaming in terms of being able to move this system along. So part of our early work, a lot of our early work, was just about trying to build that capacity. Have teachers develop an understanding of the why, and then think about and understand what are the tools that they have access to, things that they may already be doing. We just need to do in a different way to be able to support students. Next, if you want to move along. One of the big pieces last year was that we introduced a position called a de-streaming teacher coach in secondary. So there was funding that was available, and we actually took a teacher for a semester in every school for 2 semesters in both Bishop Reading and St. Francis Xavier based on their demographic and their population. And those teachers had one period in that semester where their job was to try and work amongst the various de-streamed courses and teachers there to try and build capacity. So we did a few things. We ran PD for those teachers. So we ran several days for those teachers about what's the type of information or data that you might be trying to get from teachers. How do you coordinate PD? How do you structure these things? What's the PD that you need? Talking about things like universal design for learning, differentiating instruction, CRP, culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. Trying to bring some of those pieces in. How do we build the capacity? And the theory behind it was that by building capacity within a building, you now have a teacher who is in a building every day able to work with educators there to say, what are we working on? What's our next step? That was the plan. And we went after it with great vigor. It was a challenge to be able to make it turn into everything that we wanted it to be. One of the problems being that depending on some of those other factors that were in schools, as those teacher coaches were getting drawn into other pieces, their own teaching, their own curriculum, it just became hard that they were going to have that reliability. The other thing is just some basic logistical pieces. We always knew that they had one period. If that didn't align with another teacher's prep period in secondary, it may be difficult for you to be able to spend a ton of time together. So anyways, this was a strategy that we used. Schools use it with a variety of effectiveness to be able to increase awareness around strategies. There was an actual professional development day in secondary last year. Next, you can go to the next slide. There's a professional development day dedicated to de-streaming supports in November of last year. So these de-streaming teacher coaches helped facilitate a day where teachers in all subject areas were talking about what are the strategies that they're using. Something that's interesting to note here, and that I'll mention again later on, is that there are also courses that have always been de-streamed, right? So my background, like right now, this is really difficult for me just to sit at this table because my background as a secondary phys ed teacher means that I would like to be standing and just yelling at all of you. Like, and I mean that just in projecting, not in actually yelling at you. But, you know, high school phys ed has always been an open course. Religion is an open course. All of elementary is de-streamed. They are open level. They're not level courses. They're open, right? So it was also trying to pull from what are the assets that we have? What's a grade 8 teacher doing? How different is it for a grade 8 student in grade 8 versus in grade 9? They've been de-streamed up until that point. It wasn't a shift for them. It was a shift for us. So again, we come back to that. What's the cultural change that we need in terms of teacher capacity? That was a little bit of what we needed to continue to work on. I'm going to let Michael speak to the next couple slides because at this point, Michael had entered the board, had joined us in this board, and had taken over the de-streaming portfolio. And since then, he and his team have done a little bit more work in this area.
Thank you. And I do want to mention the blessings that we do have working in a Catholic system because we are quite used to open courses. Religion has always been an open course for us, and I think that's an important thing to recognize. And some of our de-streaming teacher coaches did come from the religion portfolio to kind of say, here's how you do it. And they're phys ed teachers too. We weren't only limited to funding for secondary. We also leveraged some of the funding we received last year from the ministry with a clear mandate to focus on intermediate students, which we did. So we had 5 de-streaming teachers also dedicated to work in the intermediate area. I do have to confess a little bit of a bias given that mathematics enters into the conversation quite frequently. That a good chunk of time was also spent on mathematics, recognizing that's an urgent learning need for our students, but they weren't limited only to that. So just in the area of math, for example, we also talked about how do we kind of meet the needs of various learners going into secondary, and while they're in secondary, recognizing that we have students from a variety of different backgrounds and abilities. So we made sure that we have the math programming available already in intermediate. So that's where we purchased a new resource, Mathology for Intermediate. The ministries also came out with Knowledge Hook, or asked us to purchase a digital learning tool for mathematics. So that's Knowledge Hook. You may have heard of it, hopefully at home. But we also thought about students that were in the more advanced stages of learning mathematics, which is why we've also entered into partnership with Caribou Math. There's an online learning, it's an online contest. But I have to tell you that when you talk to me, and don't try to limit it to 5 minutes about math, but you'll know me to know that I don't believe that the contest should be limited to only students who excel. It should be tried by everybody to try and challenge themselves and see how they could do better in mathematics. The curriculum is one guidepost for us, but we always want to make sure our students are challenged as much as possible. Last year, we also revised the scope and sequence for grades 7s and 8s. Scope and sequence is basically the document we provide teachers to say, here's a good pathway to teach it through, so there's consistency across the board. And we also make sure that the curriculum is fully implemented, and so students are ready when they're moving into the secondary. We'll also be talking about something called the Collaborative Concept Studies in Mathematics. But I do want to tell you, just as one thing, we didn't just have mathematics as the focus. Last year, we had a new language curriculum launch. So grades 7 and 8, the de-streaming itinerants spent a considerable amount of time also supporting teachers in grades 7 and 8 in the introduction of this new curriculum. But then knowing that there's other challenges within our system, they wouldn't have been limited only to language. Anything anybody needed assistance with, we would provide that. And that even up to this year, I know that there's a new components of history launch, plus the removal of a resource. So we worked hard to make sure teachers are supported in this area in their journey moving into 2024-25. Collaborative concept study was basically identifying a significant challenge for teachers from grade 7 to 9 in teaching in the area of mathematics. So what we particularly chose in discussion with our department heads and our grade 7 and 8 teachers was the concept of fractions and integers. Fractions, if you could believe it, challenge people even up to the college level. They tend to bedevil all of us sometimes, so it's worth digging into. Integers came up as an interesting one where people kind of said, well, I'm surprised you're picking integers, but we do want to move beyond just a rules-based instruction and lead it into a much more deeper understanding of why things work the way they do in the reverse land that is integers. So in this process, we tend to do a very deep analysis of the work, and that comes with doing pre and post task analysis for students. So where are they entering into when we start doing the work with them, and where did they leave when we're finished, so that we know that we had an impact on the work that we did, both with the teachers and also with the students. And this work also involved talking about students with unindividual education plans and struggling learners that we're not quite sure about yet, and doing intervention work in between. These de-streaming itinerants would also then go in, and we picked a topic like multiplication, taking a look at the grade 6 data that we had, knowing that these are the future learners going into grade 9, just because they finished their journey of EQAO in grade 6 and in elementary, we know that there's still a great deal more work to be done for those students, so we want to set them up for as much success as possible. So they were doing intervention work like do the math in grade 7, anticipating that, in 2 years that student would then be entering into grade 9 and setting them up for the success that we know we want for them. The majority of students in our concept studies showed gains, which is great. We always scratched our head sometimes because some students move backwards, but it turns out sometimes, as all students, if they just didn't have a good day, they chose to maybe skip ahead really quickly through the assessment. So we did analyze their data and have some more conversations to ensure that we did understand that whether the student was moving ahead or whether they just had a bad day on an assessment. Teachers also completed a survey to kind of talk about their own, the impact of the learning on themselves and their students. So on the next slide, I'll kind of share some data that I've shared in the past. This would kind of tell you the pre and post. What we did identify was the impact was much greater in grade 7 than it was in grade 9, recognizing that oftentimes our grade 9 students had less to have to accomplish by the time they moved. But we did see a gain in each case, both in integers and in fractions. So you can kind of see which schools focused on fractions, which schools focused on integers. And part of the magic of this work was that we had grade 7, 8, and 9 teachers working together. So when we talk about de-streaming, it's a two-way street, we believe. We strongly believe that it's not just, our grade 9 teachers dealing with the impact of de-streaming, but as Bobby already mentioned, we have grade 7 and 8 teachers who be teaching de-stream their entire career. So they have insights into how to help along students who, are in a diverse group of learners within their community, and what types of instructional practices might have an impact. And that's continuing even now. So just moving along into our next slide. Just a little bit more data about how the teachers felt about it. So we know that the students had an impact, but we also can see here that teachers also had a great deal of learning that they experienced. In fractions in particular, maybe a little less so in integers, but we still felt that there was an impact on the learning and an understanding that, as our students are entering into grade 9, there's still a great deal to be understood. So moving into the next slide here. Bobby has put together a few slides to kind of answer directly the questions we did receive from SEAC. Because we know that maybe this presentation didn't tell you everything, but hopefully these can address the rest.
So this first one's pretty straightforward. It was just which courses and grades have been de-streamed. So it's only our grade 9 courses. It's math, science, geography, English, and French as a second language. French as a second language just doesn't have an updated curriculum. So currently they only use what was the previous academic curriculum. How many courses or grades have we de-streamed voluntarily? None. We have not done any. I'll speak a little bit more to that in the following slides. I also mentioned here at the bottom again that there were some other pieces that were already de-streamed to open level courses, as well as our elementary panel. And that we also have been provided new ministry documents for these courses. And those ministry documents are structured in ways to specifically facilitate the type of instruction and pedagogy that a de-stream course would require. Thanks, Megs. How will the board decide whether or not to implement further de-streaming beyond ministry mandate? At this point, there's no plans to de-stream beyond ministry mandates. And then I'll kind of loop this in with the next piece, or the next couple. What are the ministry plans for future de-streaming? Michael could probably speak to this better than I could, but at this point in time, we're not hearing further messages around de-streaming. And so one of the things to be mindful of, so you may have heard that boards like Toronto has started to make some moves to de-stream beyond grade 9. They are way further down this road than we are in terms of understanding and data collection. One of the things we need to be very mindful of is that we still exist in a stream system once we get to grade 11 and grade 12. So what we can't do is that without the proper pieces in place, start to move that streaming point further along without being able to adequately support students, or else we're going to end up with a whole different problem on our hands, which is that students now aren't aware of pathway options and what suits them and what is going to serve them the best. So at this point in time, grade 9 helps to create a little bit more space, keep those options open for longer without running into other challenges that exist within the systems and the constraints that we have there. So there are no plans for us to de-stream beyond this, but certainly work that we're going to continue to do related to de-streaming in our bags. Thank you very much. So the question then comes down to like, how are classroom teachers supporting students with diverse needs and gaps within the classrooms? So there's some language here: universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, CRP are broad pieces. I'm a big fan of analogies. I'm going to give you an analogy to try and understand what things like UDL, differentiated instruction, and a little bit of CRP deal with. There's a great book called The End of Average by Todd Rose. And he talks about the end of using average pieces to be able to create criteria. One of the examples he gives is that in the 1940s, there was a move in the American military, American Air Force, to take the average size of pilots and make the average piece of equipment in terms of helmets, harnesses, flight suits. The problem is they made them and they fit absolutely no one properly because no one actually was the average. And so what they had to do instead was look at what are the pieces that we can make variable, what are the pieces that have to be customizable. So when we talk about UDL, differentiated instruction, and elements like that, what we're really talking about is how do we take pieces in our classroom and make them as flexible as possible for the biggest group of students available. So how do I create tasks that are engaging based on what students are interested in? How do I create instructional strategies like small group instruction where I can connect with students in small, meaningful groups so that I know that they're on track or where is their learning? How do I use various forms of assessment as learning or for learning to be able to help students understand what it is they know? How do I triangulate data? In other words, rather than just having a test tell me what a student's mark is, can I have something that's written, but could I also have a student have a conference with me and tell me about it? Am I willing to look at a student's graphic representation of math and say that is communication of learning as much as it is for them to write that out as a paragraph to me, right? So looking at those elements, those become really paramount in being able to support de-streaming because it allows teachers to engage with that diverse group of students in their room. The other thing that's on here that is that's a word that gets brought up a lot, and I'll just address it quickly, is this idea of gaps and gap closing. Trying to be as asset-minded as possible with our students. We know that there was a massive disruption through COVID. One of the challenges that one of the things that we continue to work with as we support within the system from the curriculum department is we got to meet our students where they are at. What are the assets they have? What are the skills, strategies that they have? If they don't have it in terms of a skill or strategy, then it's our job to continue to work to try and teach those things. The other question here is supports or training available. So there's a few different ways. One, we've taken various approaches like de-streaming teacher coaches, the collaborative concept studies, pieces like that. But we are also doing things like trying to create internal writing teams. So rather than going to an external publisher to say, what's a resource that might be available or that we could use, can we use our own teachers to be able to compile resources that would be effective in a grade 9 class? It's especially helpful right now because things like the grade 9 geography curriculum was released. There is no Trillium listed textbook to support that course right now from the ministry. So we're trying to be able to help teachers say, well, where do you turn to be able to get content that's going to support in this area? These are also conversations that come up at subject council and secondary all the time, and part of the student achievement planning process. Today, I was in a school that was talking about a number of these elements as related to their grade 7-8 program. And so we're seeing it there. We're also seeing in the secondary panel with student achievement planning. Thanks. You want to go to the next one? Challenges related to this. One of the biggest challenges is that it's the appropriate resource and the time. So I just use that analogy about, nothing that is going to be one size fits all. Resources often are one size fits all. So trying to go and find the perfect resource that we can put into a grade 9 math class or geography class and say, this is going to suit all the students here. We need to quite literally understand that that's not going to exist in the way that we maybe thought it did before. It's going to be a curation of resources that we are using to be able to develop these courses and have students be successful in them and have them have really meaningful learning. That's a challenge when teachers are feeling like there's a lot and they're stressed out. They're looking for, what can you give me right now that can help me right now? And I understand that. We're always trying to play that back and forth a little bit of how do we help them build that relationship, but increase their capacity, change how they might be thinking about this. And part of that goes with that is we're always trying to buy time, right? You're trying to buy time. How do we find times where we can put teachers in rooms where they can have collaborative professional experiences around things like de-streaming, be supported with either a resource or someone who can help them with strategy related to these things. And so we're always trying to figure out how we can do that as best as possible. But in the current climate that we're in, that's a challenge for sure. Further to the successes mentioned earlier in this presentation, the success of de-streaming will be reflected in the representation and success of previously under and overrepresented populations in various pathways as they leave our school. I read that because ultimately that's the measure of success that we've got to go with. If at the end of the day, after de-streaming, we see a better representation of those populations that were being adversely affected by streaming in grade 9, then we know that we're being successful with these programs and how we're rolling them out and what we're doing with de-streaming. So that's one of the pieces that's measured. There's obviously, Michael's gone through lots of data that shows other ways that we've been measuring as we go and looking for impact and being able to understand those elements from our side. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, do we have any questions?
I have a couple. Well, yeah. So. Okay. What are you doing next? Sure. Thank you for your presentation, through you, Madam Chair. I also want to apologize. My son was actually sending me a video from the train. He's taking his first train ride today, so I thought it was just a picture and it came up as a video, and I apologize for that. That was rude. But yes, trains are very exciting in our house. So thank you for that. I have a couple questions just because I personally have experienced it in our house, and I've had lots of conversations with various friends because of the age of my children. I wanted to ask you a couple things. So one is the de-streaming. You mentioned that there are no plans for to continue it past grade 9 and 10. So grade 11 and 12. That's the ministry's position, correct?
Yes. So the only clarity I can give you is we've gotten no direction from the ministry,
right,
and no hints from the ministry. So to suggest that the ministry has no plans, I couldn't tell you because I'm not there. But in the crystal ball that we receive and Director Klein might receive, we have received no word or inclination that
Not even a
there's,
sentence it's on.
Oh,
yeah,
really?
and sometimes we'd hear something, but there's
Yeah.
nothing.
So in light of that, do other provinces?
Madam Chair. I
Oh,
apologize.
through you, Madam Chair.
Through
I know,
you.
we're pretty casual. Do we know what other provinces, like, do they de-stream right through to grade 12?
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry. I don't have the data for you. I could find out relatively quickly based on the knowledge I have of what goes on in other provinces.
Yeah, I'm curious.
I don't
Okay.
think so. But I don't want to speak too quickly because the Quebec model is quite unique in the way that they approach things, because
That's
they
okay.
also have that CEGEP model. So
Right.
I would need to do a little bit more analysis to make sure I got that right before
Okay.
I told you all about every province.
More, I'm just curious, like, if that was
Yeah.
something that's going to continue. And then right now, the current data that you have loads of, I'm sure. I know your passion for math.
Yes.
This is the third school year right now? Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair.
21.
The math was de-streamed in 2020.
2020.
So we're now in the 4th or 5th year almost of implementation.
Okay. So we'll start having a pretty good idea of once these kids have hit post-secondary, they've graduated.
I'm pretty, the data that I'm receiving right now, I'm not particularly concerned about what we're seeing. Both between failure analysis and understanding how the outcomes for our students. I don't see, the metrics I'm using is just to take a look at school averages and class averages and taking a look at where students are going. I have my own lofty goals about increasing students' pathways, but I also can say that part of the de-streaming model is understanding that at some point students do veer off into different career paths.
Sure.
And so certain courses are designed for, a student who's moving into a trade versus a student who is going to be going and studying aerospace engineering in university. The mathematics looks a little bit different for them. So
That's fair.
and that's around
Yeah.
grade 11, grade 10 is where we start
When they
that
start
path.
seeing. Okay. And then, can I ask one more? Go. Thank you.
So I also have more than a couple, so we'll go back and forth until someone else raises their hand. Thank you very much for the presentation. I was one of the people that was requesting an update, so I appreciate it very much. And I did go back to 2021 just to kind of bring myself up to speed. And my first is a comment that I want to share, and you feel free to comment back, but I'm not looking to debate it, but I did ask about it in 2021. And it was emphasized again tonight, this notion that streaming has little to no benefit for high achieving students. And I did ask for clarity for that in 2021. And my understanding is that that's based on achievement scores like EQAO, PISA, et cetera. So yeah, if a student's already achieving at the top, there's not much room to improve, right? So that's a little bit of in my mind, a misleading statement. And I will say that I do believe those students do benefit from streaming. Even in academic courses don't always fill the needs of those students. And that's why I think we've seen success in things like AP and IB, because that's a form of streaming as well, if you will, right? And I do have two kids who are out of the system now. One is graduated university, math guy, following the actuarial pathway now. So you can talk to him all day long about math. The other one's more than halfway through. They absolutely, unequivocally benefited tremendously from AP. So I have trouble hearing that statement. And I will also say that my math guy was frustrated in grade 9, and maybe a little bit to Trustee Powell's question, but sorry, not frustrated in grade 9. When he got to university in first year, even hearing from his professors that Ontario students, and this is an Ontario curriculum comment, but we're behind other provinces and international students in terms of their math knowledge. So that's coming from a first year university prof. So I thought that was very interesting. So I do think streaming can benefit students at the higher, like the high achieving students. So I'll just sort of leave that there. But I'm happy to see that HCSB has continued with AP and IB programs because they were a bit at risk when de-streaming first came out. So that's great. Question. So if math was de-streamed in 20, I thought it was 2021, but if it was de-streamed in 20, then those students have now graduated, right? They would have graduated in 2024.
If that should be correct. I'm
I
just
think
trying
I-
to do the math in my head, and
I
like
did it in
2020
mine.
stands out as it was the year of COVID, and
Right.
unfortunately, not a great time to be.
Yeah.
Self-admittedly, not a great time to be introducing de-streaming during the height of a pandemic.
Absolutely.
But that's why my memory is telling me it's 2020. 2021 was the graduation year.
Yeah, I was thinking it was 2021 because our presentation here was May of 2021, and I thought de-streaming was starting that September. So, but either way, whether,
So
I'm just wondering, so then we would have, if those students have graduated, then we should have some stats on whether there's increased numbers pursuing that university pathway. And even without them graduating, we would be like, what data do we have even going into grade 10? Are there more students now pursuing that academic pathway than before de-streaming? Because we'd have a few years of data on that, right? So I'd like to know overall if we're seeing more students going that way. And then also in terms of these groups that were hopefully previously, underrepresented in academic, are we seeing more of those students also pursuing? Because that, as you've said correctly, that is how we measure if this is successful, right? That was the goal. That was really the goal. So do we have that data? Do we see that?
I don't have the actual, my memory is working pretty well. I want to say there's about a 2 to 3% bump at least of grade 10 students in academic last year as a result of de-streaming likely. And it is something to be celebrated because we have students who really want to try now and feel that they have the ability to get into academic and try it out, as opposed to, you know, the journey moving away from applied for a grade 9 student meant that they had to take another 6-week course as a bridge, right? The reward to get into academic was I now have to take 6 more weeks, or I think it was a 6-week course to then get into the academic stream. They don't have to do that anymore. So yes, and I have not seen an increase that I can tell from the norm in grade 10 scores as a result. But there's still work to be done in the math world. But I analyze it purely from the mathematical perspective. I have not seen an increase or a decrease in scores that I understand in grade 10 or 11 English and the other ones. But some of this is far too early for me to say anything because we're just in the infancy of de-streaming in English and geography.
Right, but so if I understand.
But mathematics was 2020.
Right, so you're seeing a 2 to 3% increase in the number of students pursuing
grade 10 academic mathematics.
Right, okay.
And I could get the actual data for you because I do have that somewhere. I don't have it on me, but I can tell you there was an increase.
And what about those previously underrepresented groups? Do we see an increase in their following that pathway as well?
For that, we would need the expertise of our research team.
Okay.
They have expertly collected and collated data like that. Yeah. Whether we've actually parsed that out, I'm not quite sure, but that would we need to take that and do a pretty deep analysis on that question.
Yeah, because that was kind of the reason for all of this, right? Or one of the, I guess, overall, and then those groups in particular. Can I ask another question? And then what about inadvertent streaming? So we talked about this in 2021 again, right? This possibility that we may see more students in locally developed and or AP and IB as sort of those could also be streaming, right? So have we been monitoring that and have we seen that?
There has not been Madam Chair, through you. There has not been an increase in locally developed. We continue to kind of hover around 2%. And in terms of AB and IP, IP and AB, IB and AP, it's very difficult to speak on that as we're rolling that out in different schools, and different schools have introduced it in the last few years. So it would need to be done more as a percentage, but not to, the other challenge of analyzing that data would also be then to parse out the difference between the students coming from the Catholic system and students who are arriving to us from the public system. And we are talking about a significant number of students coming to us from the public system. across the board.
Yeah, I think because they got rid of their AP, is my understanding.
I don't want to speculate too much on their intent, but I do understand that, you know, based on what I've seen, even at St. Kateri, we had what seemed like a tsunami of people there, very much interested in AP and IB.
Yeah, so I was aware that there was increase in the program, so I wondered if that could be attributed to the de-streaming.
I'd like to think that the first calling is that they love a Catholic system and love what we offer. So, is there any other answer to provide?
Anyways, I can turn it over to, and then I've got some more.
Through you, Madam Chair, if we're going to continue our formality today.
Sorry, it's
It's fine. It's
that's why I still look at my elementary school teachers and call them, you know, Mr. McDermott.
You're not most formal here, but it's all good.
I was just curious what the response from teachers now was. I guess now that we're potentially 3 school years, 4 years, you know, we're going into our 4th, 3. I can't do the math. I need to go back. I know. I need to do streaming.
Madam Chair, I don't want to speak on a collective whole, to be honest. I think that for the same reasons you'd see the variability in answers, even in elementary with regards to full inclusivity or questions about that. The reality is it is. So I think for some, I think there's an awareness now, if I had to speculate, there's an awareness of the importance of it and the reality of when we stream kids too early, we're closing pathways for them. And I think that's the part to consider in the whole, that, you know, if I can share my own philosophy, the job of education is to open doors, not close them. And so if you choose the pathway for a kid at a very early stage and put them in that path, you've now potentially closed doors for them. So let's try to keep those doors as wide open as possible so they can walk through them instead of saying, you know, this is here, you can't use this one. And, you know, who's to say what the right age is? I think at grade 9, we've all come to recognize as a province that the journey needs to continue for them. And we need to keep thinking about the impact that it might have on them.
Thank you. I wish all teachers were like that. Yeah, thank you.
I did, and that was one of mine, so thank you, Trustee Powell. I think I know the answer to the next one, but I don't want to assume. Do we know why the ministry is not has not made any plans for further streaming? Do we have any? Because it seemed like when they were rolling it out, it seemed like we're going to do grade 9, and probably next year we're going to do grade 10. It seemed like they were like it was really happening, and then it sounds like it's kind of just stopped, which is kind of strange. So I don't know if we know why that is.
Madam Chair, I do not want to speculate on the intent of the ministry. I will only say that I do enjoy getting a little bit of time to get things right. So if it's from a selfish perspective, you know, let's take a look at how we can do this really right in grade 9 before moving ahead. But we serve at the will of the Board of Trustees, and the Board of Trustees serve the Ministry of Education and the funding model they provide us. So if they give us direction in one way or another, then that's what we follow.
So that might answer my next question, which was why the board has not also voluntarily done further.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I believe I can defer to Director Klein on this too. I would tell you that again, from my own selfish perspective, I'd like to get things right in grade 9 first, but Director Klein.
Thank you, through Madam Chair. I think part of the conundrum that Superintendent Skripik was describing was you're kind of operating with the black box in front of you, and you're trying to read or any type of signals of where the ministry is going on this. And there's been radio silence really for the last couple of years on this. The experiment, as it were, in terms of going into a de-streamed guess, approach, you couldn't have timed it worse. Heading like it was, I absolutely remember, and almost before they shut things down that spring, there were massive online meetings regarding de-streaming. And I do remember the kind of the uphill battle, in particular the culture shift that was calling upon for secondary teachers in particular. And then all boards began to do some really good work to kind of marry those two panels to have that, and then bam, we walked into it. So even the data, I think, would be really, it would be a stretch to say, you know, this data is a solid thread. So I agree with Superintendent Skripek, it's going to take a few years. And I like your approach, Superintendent, in terms of the glass half full, because we can look on it and go, okay, then we have more time to kind of play with this and experiment with it and see some, maybe the more data, the more reliable it will be, rather than what we've got, which is fairly skewed. Even EQAO has put up a big red flag when it comes to those 2 years to say, please don't even dare include this with anything else before or after. So we've got kind of pylons around this right now. Given that, as our trustees know very well, there's not always a lot of real solid predictability in terms of funding. I think we'd be we need to be cautious and then just focus on the little part of a garden that we have in front of us and try and make sure that things grow as well as possible.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to add on, the ministry is doing a number of different other initiatives right now as well. Adding the tech course, the mandatory tech course in grade 9 is one of those examples. Introducing a financial literacy assessment in grade 10 is another example. And the introduction and the slow movement of whether students are ready or not towards online learning asynchronously is a third component, a third prong to that. And I believe that there's quite a bit of change happening in education as we speak. And that notion of moving into a grade 10 D-stream might just be one extra element that it might be good to take a pause as we see all the other changes happening around us. But there may be elections in the offing, and those are the conversations to be had. Who knows?
And I don't know if this is for either one of you, but Bobby, it might be for you. You had touched on, looking for appropriate resources, right? What does that look like? I mean, that's a spectrum of students that, we're trying to support, and, recognizing that educators are doing their very best. I know we're a couple years into that, but, how does that work with respect to resources? How do you find those resources that are out of the box, or, how are those created? How are those provided to, and how are those continuously evaluated and developed? If you don't mind touching on that a little bit.
Absolutely. So there's a kind of a few different elements that are in play. One is, and I mentioned it in the presentation, is the trillion list. So the Ministry of Education produces a list of textbooks by class or subject area for all curriculum. If a textbook or a resource is on that trillion list, it means that it can stand as not the sole, but the primary resource to be able to teach that course. So you could have a grade 9 geography class, and it's like, hey, here's the textbook. And essentially, if you're working through this, whether it's with just the textbook or if there's student resources, you are going to hit kind of all curriculum content areas, and it's suitable in terms of the ministry's eyes and their vetting related to assessment and evaluation pieces that are embedded in it, being culturally appropriate, things like that. Those lists are timed out. So after so many years, textbooks have to be reviewed, or the application has to be done, or there's a new resource coming in. So a publisher like Pearson says, here's our textbook that we're putting forward for this course. Something that we are starting to see now is that the ministry is having courses come up, like the new grade 9 D-stream geography, and they're not saying, and here's the textbook or resource that you can use in terms of it comes from Pearson. What they are using, and when we talk about resources we go to, is they're looking at the virtual learning environment, the VLE and D2L. They're producing course shells there that have resources embedded in them. Now, in many ways, we have those. We also have organizations like Catholic Virtual Ontario that are taking Catholic content and embedding into those courses. It's not every course, but they're building them out. Those are wonderful. But again, when we talk about like a shift for a teacher, it's a really different thing if they've gone through 30 years of their own education based on being very successful in one format. And now all of a sudden, you don't have that thing that you can kind of plan around. You're going to kind of pull this from a few different areas. And so that's where my department does work to try and highlight what's available through D2L, what's available through the VLE, what is on the Trillium list, what other resources in terms of we might make a purchase around things like Mathology or MathUp. Making investments in those. Flyleaf would be an example of a program that we invested in for early reading. So we're looking for those. Once we get into high school, it's a little bit in elementary. The elementary panel tend to see more resources that are a little bit more structured. In secondary, we start to see not as many of those, and part of that comes from the fact that students are going to be able to bring more of themselves into the classroom as well. They might be looking for content sources that they're saying, this is a piece of content that I want to read related to this history course or something like that, and teachers are working with students in that regard. The library, our library resource services are incredible also at curating, putting together resources and resource packages, but that's just, it is a constant look to say, what are we using? And the question right now that we get more than any in our department is, what's the resource for me to teach this with, right? And we look at things like and I'll use language in the elementary curriculum, brand new language curriculum. The science of reading has fundamentally changed how we're teaching literacy to our youngest students. If you're a grade 6 student right now, you have a teacher who didn't learn to read this way. You didn't learn to read this way, but you now have curriculum elements that are brand new to everyone in that room. Okay, well, how do we teach you morphology when you never even learned morphology, right? Those are some of the challenges. So how do we find a resource that is suitable there? And that's what we do, is we try and use our curriculum consultants to find those things, highlight them, and then get them out. But again, we can get them to teachers feeling like they have enough time to really feel like they can embed that and integrate that into their practice is the other part of that kind of equation to be able to make that kind of gain some traction.
And that's good to hear, because, you know, even when we've had discussions here with respect to differentiated learning, and I've always, and this is never a slag at all on staff, but I've always kind of been like a half eye roll. I'm like, how, right? Like, honestly, like I've always thought, how do you do that in an effective, impactful way? And, you know, this just adds, this de-streaming piece just adds layers to that, right? So if we were already looking at how we're doing differentiated learning within a classroom environment, now we're taking it to like kind of the nth degree. So I was curious how, because a big part of that is in resource development and resource implementation, and how are we teaching these in different ways, and how are we reaching the learners that are here and the learners that are here, so that they're both coming out of that class successful, feeling that they're being challenged, and then, you know, the learners that maybe are not up here, that are a little bit more down here, not being completely dissuaded or discouraged, right, in their learning, because we don't want them to get to the next level and say, can't do this, you know, this was horrible, this is a horrible experience. So, you know, I think that resource piece is so key, and I've always kind of wondered, how do we develop those to make the learners successful?
Yeah, and if I can add another kind of layered piece to that, the other thing that makes it even more complex is that you can't take that resource piece away from the assessment and evaluation practice that's going to be in the room either, right? So one of the things, and this is a benefit to some of the things that are going on, is that teachers are using a program like Knowledge Hub. There's an immediate reaction to it where teachers can be like, this is something new, do I have time for something new? But then you start to realize, by going through this in a diagnostic way, you now have a really quick way to be able to understand exactly where your students are at. If this is Google Maps, it's a lot easier to give someone directions if you know where they are starting from and how it is they are going to travel from where they are to where they want to go, right? That's what this is about in a really simplified way. How do we, to be really effective with this, we need to know where students are at, where they want to go, and what are the means that they're going to use to get there. Eventually, we can get them all there. It's going to look different, right? That is the goal, but that is a really complex thing to do in a classroom that has 30 plus students in it who have a really wide range of, and you haven't been asked to do it in that way before, right? So that's where it's certainly an uphill battle for us. But you're trying to put all those things together, and even things like the conversations around artificial intelligence right now are asking teachers to reframe what they do in great ways. AI was terrifying 6 months ago to teachers, and it's still overwhelming for sure. The majority of teachers I talk to right now are like, oh no, I can figure out how to do this around assessment. If I do better triangulation of data, I can work around AI. I can now start to embed AI, do this effectively in my class. And that's where the PA day that happens this Friday, that's what it's about for secondary, right? These pieces are always deeply connected. And by working on one, we're improving the parts to all.
Maria, did you have another question?
I have two, if that's okay. I'm really appreciating the fullness of the answers, though. So thank you again. So I noticed on the board website on one of the org charts, there's 5 de-streaming itineraries. So I don't know if I missed something because I didn't hear how they fit into this or what the role is. And I would also be curious about the funding because my understanding is there's no longer funding for de-streaming.
Madam Chair, that would be old information. That was last year's model. So the ministry did provide us significant funding last year, but the ministry giveth and the ministry taketh away. And so we don't have those de-streaming itinerants anymore. At this point, we have one intermediate itinerant teacher in mathematics and one secondary itinerant teacher in mathematics. But that model no longer exists because we don't have the funding for it.
Right, well, that was what I was wondering. So they're not the 2 that you're talking about, they're not de-streaming, they're mathematics. So that would be part of their role, but they're not strictly de-streaming. Okay. So my last question.
We tend to do focus a lot. Sorry to interrupt you. I apologize. No. We do tend to focus quite a bit on 1W, so we continue to put that focus on grade 9.
So my last question is a bit in the weeds, but you mentioned Caribou Math and that was new this year to HCDSB, but I know like my son did it, I don't know, 10 years ago. So just trying to understand why that's being characterized as new and also why Caribou Math and not Waterloo Math.
Madam Chair. So new to HCDSB in the sense that it's available to everybody. So every student across the district now has access to that tool if they want to use it. So that's what's new about it. And I agree. I've been using Caribou Math quite a bit myself. I have no perceived bias. And in fact, I do quite enjoy University of Waterloo, but I follow the money. And so University of Waterloo isn't a digital tool. And I was able to use our digital math tool funding to provide Caribou Math for our students, anticipating that this would be a good way to kind of allow students who excel to continue to excel, much like Knowledge Hook. If a student were to want to self-learn, they could easily use Knowledge Hook there's a Mathlon feature, we call that. They could teach themselves the entirety of the math curriculum in 1 month if they wanted to, using that tool. So Caribou, if I had extra funding, University of Waterloo would also get my vote. I have no favor of either one, but Caribou was digital, so I'm able to provide the funding for it.
Digital, but Waterloo is not.
No, Waterloo is a paper-based assessment.
Right, and the reason I asked that because I did have experience with both, and I don't know if this was unique to my situation, but my son would write the Caribou Math, and they didn't have solutions for all the questions, and his cert. I don't know, I'm not a math person. So like he would do a question, get it wrong, and there would be no help as to, whereas Waterloo, like I'm sure you're familiar with their website, they have extensive solutions. So that's why I sort of really like, and Waterloo they're right up there with math, right? And I love your comment that everyone should do those questions because they are hard. I tried a lot of them. They're tough questions, so.
You may have actually seen me talking to my son today because Caribou just took place last week, and I'm like, hey, how'd you handle this one? This one was a little tricky. Caribou does have the solutions, maybe not immediate, but you can take all the previous contests that you want, and most of them have a YouTube channel with a boy that you could literally watch grow up from the time he didn't have a deep voice to the time, I guess he's in university, and he'd give the sample solutions for you. Which I may have done quite a bit during COVID with my son. There's a lot of watching people do math online. Madam Chair, you could laugh and mock me all you want. It's okay.
I have some paint I'd like to watch dry, but but if you say so, I'll definitely endeavor to.
I get you. We've done a lot of that in our house too.
Yeah. So, thank you for all the questions today. If anybody has anything more, if it's math related, you may want to add more time onto your calendar. All other concepts of de-streaming, I do have, lots to talk about there, and, always welcome to take feedback as well, so we can continue to think about how we can make our system better for all our students.
Very appreciative to both of you for coming in tonight. You can see that this was obviously an interesting conversation, and I think, it's, there's a different lens at this table, if you will. And that's not to say that, other parents and other students don't have an interest in this, but, our students have different exceptionalities and different approaches. And again, we're kind of at the spectrum here. So, I always find that our questions and our insights are a little different, if you will. So it's always really helpful to have some of these board level discussions about programs and initiatives sort of at this table. So very grateful to both of you. Again, I think we answered a lot of questions, and we will certainly continue to ask those if we have additional ones, but just grateful for your time tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great, thanks. Okay, moving along, and you're free to stay. You don't have to run away. If you've got math, it sounds like you've got math to go watch. Yeah, so if you want to go watch some math, you go right. you go right ahead and do that. Moving on to item number 4, which is the approval of the minutes. So you will have had a copy of the minutes in your agenda package. Was there any questions or comments as they relate to the minutes? Okay, perfect. So if I could just get someone to move for the approval of the minutes from the November 4th, 2024 meeting, that'd be great. Rick moves. Okay, can I get a seconder? Okay, thanks, Mandy. Seconder. Great. Item number 5 is business arising. We've updated and cleaned up that chart as we discussed at nauseum our last meeting. And so it is there in your package. As everybody knows, there's sort of, I think, just the one item that is sitting there, but we will always add to that if we need to as items arise. And based on our conversation from last week as well with committees, we are going to add that to our December meeting to have a conversation. I know Maria had made a good suggestion about actually having a targeted conversation at the table about subcommittees and some of those SEAC initiatives. So we will add that to the December meeting. And I only mention it because it had been sitting on our business arising for quite a while. Moving on to item number 6, which is policy review. So we do have a policy here this evening. Superintendent Jack Caldera, I think you'll probably speak to this for us. So it's policy II-20, child abuse and protection students. So over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you can see on the screen, we have an opportunity to seek feedback, obviously, from SEAC members around the policy that is intended to support students, our educator response to child abuse and protection of our students. This is obviously a collaboration with our CAS chapter, our Halton CAS chapter. There's quite a few references because, it does pertain to the Child and Youth and Family Services Act, the Criminal Code, the Education Act. The list goes on. And the hope for today is that you've had a chance to review the policy. We did put it in the chart as part of a standing item so that you would be aware of all the policies that are being reviewed this year, and would be seeking some of your feedback. It's one of those collaborations that we have with CAS and the duty to report. And one conversation I had with some members from CAS is looking at it as a duty to support. So how do we support families and students who may be experiencing for short-term or longer-term some form of crisis or needing some intervention, and of course wanting to make sure that all students, irrespective of their abilities, has that protection. So some can articulate when something is wrong and some cannot. We still have that obligation to make sure that we're supporting our students. So I'm not sure if we can scroll up a little bit more. Just looking at the scope of what the policy achieves and updating that, and then the requirements, which a lot will as CAS updates and other acts update their language, those changes will naturally occur, but we certainly wanted feedback on your experiences or how you felt it reads. And so you have it in your package. What's the date that we need the feedback by?
For the January.
I think it's December 13th.
December, yes.
13th, because it goes through a vetting process.
Yes, right. Yes.
So I believe the date is December 13th, but it will be accurate in your minutes when you get it tomorrow.
Yep. So does anybody have any questions or comments about this policy review? Go ahead, Maria.
So not specifically the policy itself, but I'm just trying to understand the process. What we've got in the package, again, I don't see any red lines. So is this the current policy? Is this the policy with the proposed changes? What are we seeing?
So we do have the red line. The process, I understand it, is to let you know that there is a review and to seek some feedback. I know that in years past, there may have been the circulation of the red line. Sometimes it syncs up with our SEAC meeting, sometimes it doesn't, and we definitely didn't want to miss the opportunity to solicit that feedback. So I think the red line is up with lots of notes and suggestions, but that's not necessarily all data that's going to be reflected in the actual policy. So that's why we listed them right at the beginning of the year, so everyone can take a look at those policies and have a good sense of what it pertains, and then we get that feedback kind of organically without influence. We don't want to lead the witness.
Yeah, so I understand. Like, I think that's a good approach, right? That, we're looking at it, like you said, without influence, right? And you're sort of coming with a fresh mind. And not to make the process too complicated, but I think it also would be helpful, so whether there's 2 stages to it, to see what the proposed changes are, because so that we have an opportunity to also comment on those, right? Because otherwise we don't really know what the policy committee is seeing.
I think,
that make
sorry,
sense?
Madam Chair. I think the hope, though, is that as a principal, they might have a different perspective. An educator would have a different perspective. They're also educators, but a teacher might have a different perspective, and a parent will have a different perspective, and parents of SEAC or SEAC members will have completely different perspectives. And where we see themes emerging, I think we get a better sense of what needs to change and what needs to remain, as opposed to, oh, I saw that, I'm going to say that too, and then you sometimes get a compromised output. So not to say one way is better than the other, but I think in all the scenarios, as the SO that's going to present it, I will get all the feedback and be able to say this is what we think it reflects all the stakeholders, as opposed to yes, like we don't want a bunch of yeses just because that was the suggestion, or a bunch of no's because that was the suggestion either. So appreciating where your position is, but I don't know if that answers your question, just the approach of getting everyone's feedback.
Sort of mulling it over, because I do hear what you're saying, right? Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Because I think that's not unlike, I know we've had these conversations before, but I think that's not unlike how it's approached at the policy review table, right? So not the policy committee, but not the policy meeting, but there is a committee, right, that reviews these, and then they all come from different perspectives, sit around the table, and then have these conversations about suggested changes to it. So this, I think, is not unlike that, correct? So they would be doing that, we're doing this, and then everybody comes together. So then you have the principals, you may have somebody from Safe Schools, you may have somebody from us, CPIC that comes in and says, okay, and then that is taken one final time to that policy committee, that policy table, then it comes to the policy meeting.
So the last stop really is, as the SO in this particular one, I will get it and I will go through to the director.
Right.
So I will get all the feedback from all the stakeholders, and then that's what's presented to the director, and then that's what's shared at the policy board meeting, which is a very robust process, but it ensures that we get it right, or at least get as much information from different voices in reflected.
Yeah.
We're approaching it as an equal stakeholder the same way a principal would, or another department would, or another committee would. So they get the same thing we get, like they get the policy. So let's say CPIC or whoever gets the actual policy without red line, here it is, it's up for review. Is there any changes you think you want to make? They make those changes, they come together, and then they decide what changes to implement. So we're kind of just one of those stakeholders that gets the policy, reviews it, hands in our red line, and then those are all considered. So I guess that's the way that I look at it.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking it might be helpful at some point, even if it's just like for information, to see that redlined. Because I guess the counterpoint that I could make is, and I do agree with your point, like, oh yeah, that like you're like it's sort of a group think kind of thing, right? But on the other hand, there might be something that I would go, oh, whoa, no, I don't agree with that at all, right? And it's not part of your feedback, but it's come from somewhere else, and so there's no opportunity to kind of comment on that. I'm just wondering if maybe even just as an information piece, to be able to see the red line, so that we are aware of the changes that are, because they usually end up getting approved at policy committee. I know not always, but even just for an information piece.
Through you, Madam Chair. So I believe before it goes to board policy meeting, that agenda is shared and it's public. So everyone, there's representation at that table from SEAC trustees, but we get that feedback, and those voices, they are your elected kind of officials to support those changes. But then that red line version is released, I believe, as part of the policy agenda as well. So if that's helpful, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, if I could make one suggestion then, that I think sort of is a compromise to all of that. I believe, and I don't think I'm getting them anymore because my email changed, but as SEAC members, I believe we get copies of the board packages when they go out, right? So maybe we could also be on the distribution list for policy committee packages when they go out. No, we used to. I used to get it, and then when my email changed, I stopped, and I never followed up. So I assumed it was because I was on SEAC. I don't know why else I would.
Director can comment, but I'm pretty sure that
Okay.
like no committee, like so when the agenda goes out on the Thursday,
Yeah.
we get a package with it, it just goes to trustees. It doesn't go out to anyone else.
I got it for a year. I used to get it for years until my email changed. I don't know why. I'm sure they didn't want me getting it.
I don't think anybody else gets it.
I was going to say, I think I did in the very beginning. There was a couple of times that I ignored it and got taken off. So there might have been an accidental distribution.
And then there's also, we get an email, there's a link to eScribe, internal access, and then there's also the board website.
Oh yeah, it was a link. I didn't get the actual like PDF. It was a link to it. But don't worry, I know where to find it anyways.
No, yeah, yeah.
You can't hide it from me. No, I got it every time. I swear I did. Anyways, I haven't for a long time. I thought it was because my email changed, but maybe the process changed at some point. I don't know.
But for ones that might retain a policy review.
Absolutely, and I was only suggesting for all of them because I just thought it would be easy, like just easy to change the process that way, right? So you're not having to remember, oh, SEAC should get the link this time. That's, I know. Yeah, yeah.
when would you, in case SEAC members have not had a chance to review and they would like to, when did you want to have ultimate feedback back?
So in the past, we've sent out a Microsoft kind of form and asked for feedback, and then that's what we use to embed some decision making. So if that still works, that's the intention, to use that process. If
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, great. So moving on to item number 7, action and information items. We do not have any this evening. Board committee updates. I don't have any. I know that the BPI meeting got moved to January. Is that correct, Trish? Okay. And mental health, we had a meeting when I wasn't there. When was that? Is it in your report?
I didn't put it in my report, Madam Chair.
Okay.
I'm upset. I forgot that.
That's okay. That's okay. So I don't have any updates from that one. I don't think there's been any other meetings that we have SEAC representation on. There's nothing here, and I don't think there, I think that's why I don't think there's anything else here, right? Okay. But I did want to say on that, it's not necessarily a board committee, but do we have enough people for Spirit of Inclusion committee? Did we have enough people put their name forward? Do we know? Yeah, and I was happy to do it. So 2. So Rick, okay. Okay, all right. Okay, so can we just send out another reminder, Margaret, if that's okay? Just when that will be happening, and if people want to participate, that'd be awesome. I know it's not a board committee, but just wanted to mention that. Okay. So we don't have any other updates from board committees. Did we find a representative for the, sorry, it's Monday.
Focus on faith.
Thank you very much. Did we find a representative for that? Do we have someone that put their name forward for that committee? Do we still need someone for that?
So I didn't put my name forward because one meeting's already happened. I don't know if I could do the next one,
Okay.
but if there isn't someone else, I'd be happy to do it. I don't know that if I missed 2 out of 3 meetings.
Right.
But I don't know for sure, but I
Okay.
might be away
Okay.
for February 1. Otherwise, I'd be happy to do it.
Well, we don't have representation, so I think it's
Yeah.
always important to have SEAC
Yeah.
representation. So if you want to do that, Maria,
Sure.
maybe someone can bring you up to speed from the committee.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's put Maria and Trish as sort of like backups, like to each other for those. That would be great. Because again, I don't want to miss an opportunity to have someone on. Okay. And maybe, like I said, Maria, maybe somebody, it's Superintendent Nara that leads that. So maybe they could, bring you up to speed or get, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, great. And just let them know you missed the last one. And maybe they can send you the minutes from the previous one. Okay, perfect. Moving on to item number 9, communication to SEAC. So we do have the trustee report. So Trustee Powell, over to you.
Thank you. I will keep it brief, as I know a lot will be covered right after me. I know. On November 5th, so we had 2 regular board meetings in November, November 5th and 19th. November 5th, we had our Superintendent Del Sordo bring in an amazing group of students who are part of the first competition team, robotic team from Loyola. They gave us a live demo of the robots that they had built, and incredibly entertaining and very inspiring. I thought, wow, got up my game there in my parenting, but they were really good. And they've gone to Houston. I think they won. They placed in our.
They're going to use.
They're going.
Yeah,
Okay.
in the spring. When-
We're channeling the win. They're gonna win in my book.
So-
Thursday, November 14th, our Halton Catholic Children's Foundation, there was a fundraising evening with Bishop Crosby, who was always entertaining. I was away, so I know our director and a few trustees represented us at that event. That's an opportunity to raise funds to help our students overcome financial barriers to learning. It's a program that is done in the individual schools. And we also had an early literacy screening program presentation by Superintendent Kroll on November 19th. And I thought there were a few points that I wanted to highlight. This was a screening program that came out of the Ontario Human Rights Commission report back in 2022. And from that, the ministry provided funding to our board, every board, to purchase an early literacy screening tool that helps identify students who are not at benchmark in both English and French. And we also, I believe that we received some funding to hire early literacy screening teachers, and that helps support screening for our year 2 kindergartens, grade 1 and grade 2 students in English, as well as grade 2 French immersion students. And it provides interventions to students who require support to improve literacy. And supposedly it's doing very well. Seemed positive from what he sounded. Yeah, and they're expecting a new kindergarten curriculum for next September. And then finally, our 12th annual Keeping Christ in Christmas, our student contest is, the submission period is closed, and you can actually go online. I think it's on our website. Sorry, I actually don't have the website in front of me. But our finalist entries they're narrowed down, and you can go online to be part of the voting process. And voting ends December 1st at midnight, and they're presented December 3rd, right? At our, oh yeah, it's next week. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Christmas is in 1 month, people. Wow. Okay, so yeah, go online and vote. It's a cool event. It's really a fun evening for us on December 3rd. That's it for me. Take it away, Superintendent Jack Caldera. Very much. Look at that. No, not at all. Do that all night. Please.
Okay, thank you. And so I do have the report. I have ensured that everyone got a copy. We have, so I'll just do highlights so that it's not reading at you. I guess the first thing I'll mention is, of course, last Tuesday we had an board election, and we have a chair, Marvin Duart, who's going to continue to be the chair for the board, and we have vice chair Emma Murphy for the 24-25 school year, and they're both proponents and supporters of special education services, but I wanted to take the time to thank Brenda, who has left that chair for Trustee Emma Murphy to take on. Big shoes to fill, but we're very happy to have you still as our chair of SEAC. And I'm going to just add kind of a shout out. Tomorrow will be actually the official 1-year anniversary of Jennifer Thompson, our consultant, who last year at this time was her first day on the job and a SEAC meeting, so it was an extended mix of our remix day. So we're doing something right because she's still here. So I wanted to extend a thank you for all the work that's being done through that role, coordinator role. And then, of course, last week was our Bullying Prevention and Awareness Week. There was lots of tweets about all the initiatives and how we're supporting, inclusivity in our schools. So hopefully you had a chance to take some of that in. I've provided all the dates to recognize in December. They're all important, but I am going to shout out December 11th because it's Educational Assistant Appreciation Day, and I don't think there's anyone in the room who hasn't had their life impacted or had contact with an education assistant who's made a difference. So if you have anything that you want to do on that, that's the day to recognize that educator group. But like I said, they're all important. We've got Christmas in there, Advent in there, so those are very important days too. But I don't think there's a group that demonstrates hope and love, and some days they're the pillar of peace. We go around the whole Advent calendar, and I'm sure, the Advent candles, and we can make those connections. So I'm going to make that very impromptu connection with EAs and our our calendar year, but I certainly wanted to make sure that we do that shout out. So student supports and programs, we have a celebration. One of our students that's enrolled in life skills at Loyola placed 3rd at OFSA in Ottawa, competing in the 400-meter run for track and field. So, just amazing. I've included some ministry updates, the Maxi reports. I've talked a little bit about that last month, but they've provided lots of literature for all members of SEAC, and I know sometimes Brenda sits at that table as well. So I just wanted to make sure that you had that in like a one-stop shop. This month, we had an online Ontario Council for Administrators of Special Education meeting, so a virtual meeting where we got lots of updates around what's going on in the province and trends, and a lot of the things that we are experiencing are shared in other boards across the province. So it's an opportunity to brag, but also an opportunity to understand how different boards are responding to challenges in special education, and to also ask questions and get those answers, so that, because sometimes parents ask us tough questions, we want to make sure that we're making informed decisions as well. And this year, so in 2007, there was a policy about incorporating ABA, applied behavior analysis, in with students with ASD. And so we're now at the point where we're being asked for some monitoring, some feedback on monitoring. So there's been some involvement on the senior team level to look at those policy mandates and then see what's working, what are some things we'd like to build upon. So we're very fortunate to continue to get opportunities to speak at the table, to share what our experiences are and how we can improve upon services for our students. I think it was last week we got a surprise announcement about some mental health funding. So waiting to hear how that will, how we will obviously benefit from that funding, and what we will spend it if we get it, and make sure that it's put to good use. But the announcement did cause some excitement in the department, because of course we know there's never enough resources and supports for students, and this is a way of trying to meet that need. Policies we've already gone through. Later on this week, progress reports. We're in the progress reporting period. I think it aligns with the full moon, so that's why some it's been particularly busy. But we certainly want to honor the hard work that goes into getting to this point where we're looking at how students are progressing. We want to build on their successes and then identify some goals. And so opportunities to speak with educators, classroom teachers, subject teachers this time of the year is quite normal. And we hope that your parent engagement in their child's learning often results in better success of students. So get involved, stay involved. Mentioned already, we're approaching Advent. So that'll be December 1st, as we're 1 month away exactly from Christmas. And then I'll provide some updates from all of the special education managers. So our EA managers update, this Friday is a PA day, just in case you didn't know, for those who have students for those who have students. And so the PA day will include training in safe management for those that are due for recertification. That's for our EA group. And additional training for the November 29th PA day will take place at school sites for those not scheduled for safe management. And this on-site training will include modules in our ABA strategies and problem solving, preventative and responsive strategies to a variety of case studies. Our senior manager update of speech language, DHH, BLV, behavior analysts. So SLPs and CDAs have completed the first block of the expanding expression program in kindergarten classes. And the feedback we've received from educators have been very positive. Denise Coley also facilitated a full day training on FASD. 40 staff participated, including educators, EAs, CYCs, and psychology staff. We're happy to share the after-school skills development program started with 2 peers groups and 2 children's friendship training groups being run over the next several months. And we are also working to expand the breadth of the programs being offered in the new year. And we require some feedback from Human Rights and Equity, so I'm going to ask Denise to make her plug.
Thank you. So you may remember that last year we did a presentation on foundations of inclusion for students with disabilities. That was done board-wide, and we're working with the Human Rights and Equity Department to sort of launch phase 2. And the vision for phase 2 is that there will be professional development embedded in staff meetings pushed out throughout the course of the year and into next year as well. So what we're looking for is your input and suggestions around topics that we might want to cover in those staff meetings. So whether it be disability etiquette, whether it be, general strategies, whether it be information about, dual diagnosis or anything really. We're looking to tap into your expertise. So, if you have thoughts now, feel free to offer them. If you have thoughts over the next couple of weeks, please reach out to Mags, who can pass it on to, or to Margaret, who can pass it on to me. And then we are looking that probably within the next 3 weeks, we're going to start generating the content and hoping to push things out starting in February.
We have ideas. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Madam Chair. Okay, so thank you for that, Denise. Our update on our wait lists are still at 19 months, which is still significantly less from the provincial average. So I know that it never feels like those are done quick enough, but we still continue to outperform in that area as well. Our CYC update. So this is exciting. Our board has been awarded the Excellence in School Implementation at the Child Development Institute for 2024 SNAP, which is the acronym for Stop Now and Plan Symposium. SNAP is an evidence-based program supporting youth mental health facilitated by the CYCs with the support of educators. So we're actually having the award presented. We're forming updates. We're going to tweet about it. Like, follow, retweet, or re-X when you see it, so that we can really continue to promote this work that we're doing. So really exciting. And then the second step, the bullying prevention pilot project, is starting again. The pre-surveys with students for the program are being completed this week with the support of the CYCs and educators, which happened the week of Bullying Prevention Week. And then this program will begin in early January 2025. And an admission to the minutes, I've added that November 7th was the Mental Health and Wellbeing Advisory Committee meeting. Yeah, November 7th. So it was an opportunity to connect. We have, students, parents, trustees, whoever can make it, to come together and talk about what our mental health programming and our well-being goals are for the school year. And it aligns to our strategic plan and our mental health plan. So it was really great to make that initial contact. Have no fear, there are 2 other meetings that are happening this year. So hopefully those members will be able to attend at that time. The mental health team also meets, and we can make sure that those dates are provided as well. The mental health team meets regularly with our implementation coach from School Mental Health Ontario to discuss how well-being strategies can be infused within the school day. The team has also been active in connecting with other departments such as equity and inclusion and the newcomer department to discuss ways that mental health information can be shared with students through many different channels. And finally, our coordinator and consultant updates. An elementary CERT FOSS was held on November 12th. CERTs received information on the online administration of the SEAC, the gifted screener, and the new process designed to have external psychological assessments reviewed, the role of the IEA, and a presentation on the newly developed debrief document. The department head meeting was also held, will be held, getting ahead of myself, that's on Wednesday. DH's department heads will also receive similar updates with the addition of updates from the Transformations program. That's a program out of Merton. We talked about that a little bit at the end of last year, and we'll have more information to share in the coming months. Principals received a presentation on the new Thrive Elementary program and the Transformations program, which is the secondary program, which is a shift from the Change and Transformation program that we had before, with an aim to support students who require additional mental health support to engage in their school communities and to access programming. And a presentation, as I mentioned, is forthcoming with additional details. A parent information session will be held on April 1st. This is no joke, for parents of kindergarten students with special education needs. Didn't say that, I just added that in. And who will be joining HCSB in September 2025. So it's hold the date. I know last year it was well attended, but certainly members from SEAC might be interested in being a part of those presentations or present on that date. So that's the date that we hope that you can keep in your calendar. The SEA team has also attended a full-day conference hosted by LearnStyle to hear updates on the SEA management system. And planning continues for a 3-day learning opportunity for essential skills teachers and technology, LearnStyle will coach the ESC teachers on preferred platforms and support the delivery of lessons in the classroom. We've also welcomed our 4th cohort of Project Research, the students for the 24-25 school year. Our Halton Catholic student interns are off to a strong start in their Project Search journey, having completed orientation and other onboarding activities. They have settled into their internships at Milton District Hospital in various departments and have already completed their first employment planning meetings. And new certs have come together on November 8th and November 19th. The topics shared and discussed were on speech and language overview and supports, behavior analysts overview and supports, specialized classes, transition plans, and case conferences. So very light agenda. It goes on with IPRC scenarios and process, IPRC meeting management, and eLight, student success meetings, alternative report cards, and reporting processes through eLight. Rooms in schools and psych staff also shared a presentation on from referrals to identification. And so definitely trying to build that capacity and support for staff who are new to the role. I don't think I missed anything, but happy to take questions.
I'll just add that December 3rd is International Day of Persons with Disabilities.
Yes, it is. And it's asterisked. It's a board recognized day. It is there.
And I know that the board, right? I know the board always does great work around that day. It's a board meeting day that day, but I know that the board always does great work around that day. So it's so just wanted to mention that. So thank you. Is there any questions at all on the superintendent's report?
I have some fun facts.
You go ahead with your fun facts.
And I see Michael's still here, actually. So it was so funny because we're talking about de-streaming and the time, not to revisit de-streaming. We're not taking any more questions on de-streaming, but in the 1990s, for those of us who were in high school at that time, there was 1 year where we had de-streaming, and then it was abandoned after the election of 1995. So there was a change from the NDP to, not to get into political parties, but there was a change, and so it was abandoned quickly. And Ontario is actually one of the last provinces to de-stream, and so. It was actually interesting because I had a sibling who was part of that 1 year of de-streaming and then next year not. And so I think that the opportunity we have here is to actually spend some time and really get some of that data. And I think that it was maybe abandoned too quickly at that time. So yeah, so that was my fun fact.
I feel sad that I wasn't in high school.
Oh, I know.
Well beyond it at that point.
I was like, we're just starting, getting thinking about it.
Like, wait a second. That's great. Thank you so much for that. So any questions at all there? Great. Because we moved on. We've moved on that agenda item. All right. What we can do is, Margaret, if you can make a note, maybe we can just jog some of SEAC members, if they leave here tonight, to think about some topics to come back to Denise with. That might be great. And the only one that I would sort of jump in on is ableism. And I'd be happy to flesh that out more, but it's something that we're seeing, it's being talked about a lot in corporate environments, being taught, just we're seeing a lot more of those conversations. Like, what does that mean? How do we see that in everyday life? What are the examples of ableism? How do we try to avoid that? So it could be something to think about. Again, I'd be happy to flesh it out a little bit more, Denise, but I think to serve as a generalized topic, it could be something to think about.
I think it's a great topic, and I would appreciate that maybe we have some further dialogue so I can understand exactly sort of what your thoughts are before we move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, and maybe understanding a little bit more as well to the other side about exactly who the audience is and what the intent is and all that stuff. And then I could try to give some suggestions. I've had the opportunity lately to be involved with several sort of international organizations that have been talking about it a lot in places that we haven't expected it or seen it before. So I'd be happy to sort of share some of those dialogues that they had. But again, certainly if we can open it up to remind SEAC members if they have ideas and maybe just, again, like a recapture of what Denise said about what we're looking for specifically, I think that would be great. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. So moving on to item number 10, SEAC discussion items and questions. I don't have anything formally here that's been submitted. Does anybody have any questions or discussion items at all for SEAC this evening? Okay. And, again, reminder that, that exists in case there's something that comes up that we want to talk about, and you can certainly send it in advance of the agenda setting, and we can add that in there if there's something that we do want to discuss. Meeting summary and next steps. Megs, you've been taking some notes, so you're all set with what needs to go out for follow-up. Our next meeting is Monday, December the 16th, so just in a few short weeks, and we'll try to do something fun for it. It's always a little bit of a shorter meeting, a festive meeting, so I really hope everybody can join us, because then that'll be it sort of before we head off into the Christmas break. Resolution for absentees. We have a couple this evening. Who do we? Jessica, Amanda, Darren, Chris, and Rhonda. Okay, perfect. So could I get someone to move for absentees? Oh, thank you, Abiola. Okay, moved by Abiola, seconded Trish, second. Thank you very much. Great. Okay, wonderful meeting. Moving on to item number 14, which is our adjournment and closing prayer. Could I get a motion to adjourn? It's usually like the first hand up, Maria. Yeah, I was like, don't be shy, everybody. Like, honestly. So moved by Maria, seconded by Mandy. Perfect. Thank you. And we will move on to our closing prayer. So if you will join me in the sign of our faith, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Blessed are you, O God of all creation. Each day you spread before us the rich and wonderful diversity of the human family created in the divine splendor of your love. Fashioned in your image, you call us to love one another with the same tender care with which you brought us to creation. Each one of us is but one small part of the glory that is you. As we serve the students and families of the Halton Catholic District School Board on the Special Education Advisory Committee, fill us with your grace, guide us with your wisdom, and give us the strength and courage to do your every work, so that it may always be said of our every act, God saw that it was good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful meeting. Have a great night.